to This Educator's Life with Dr. Zackory Kirk. That's me. And I'm really honored to be on the Educator's Room platform. I have met and engaged with many of you throughout the various anti-racism webinars and live cams that Francesca has done. And so it's really great to be here to bring a very, very special topic to you for the very first This Educator's Life. And with our very, very first guest, we have Brittany O'Neill and Jennifer Owens, but you want to go by Jen, right?
Yes, thank you.
And they represent Black Lives Matter Atlanta. They're going to talk to us and tell us some things about themselves. But before they do that, I want all of you to tell me who you are and where you're from on the platform. So chime in, who's joining us. I see our viewers are going up. Who are you? Where you're from? Don't be shy. So Brittany, talk to us. Tell us, I know you're an Atlanta native. Tell us about where you're from and what brings you to today's conversation.
Okay, hi everybody. We like to call ourselves Atlanta ATLians. I am born and raised from East Atlanta, Georgia. All my life I've been here. And your question is what brought me here into education or what brought me here to where we are?
I want to know first and foremost, you're an Atlanta native. Give us what high school did you graduate from? Where did you go to college? Call it out. Shout out your alma mater. Unless your alma mater is caught up in some racist stuff, then you don't need to give them any credit.
Well, let's just say this. I'm very proud of my elementary school. East Atlanta is my home, so I attended H.O. Burgess. Now it's H.O. Burgess Patterson. Yes, the great Michelle Obama decided to visit that school and start our plant garden. Woo! and help those babies out on a lot of levels. But yes, H.O. Burgess is my stomping grounds. I've also spent some time in downtown Decatur. So I went to DeKalb County Schools at Druid Hills and middle school at Shamrock in DeKalb. And then I went trucking along to Gwinnett County. And then from there, I went to college here at Kennesaw State University. I don't know.
Education school.
Say that again.
A phenomenal education school.
Oh, absolutely. Bagwell College of Education. Absolutely. So that's just a little bit about where I attended school and where I'm from.
And Jen, you too are an Atlanta native, an Atlantean as we call them. So yes. Tell us a little bit about what schools you went to and how you came to this point.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up all around the metro Atlanta area. I was born over in Douglasville on the west side. Then I was going to school up in Cherokee County, north of the city. And then these days I'm in Midtown area. So brought it back down to the city. All of that except for 1 year that I ran away to New Zealand to teach abroad and learned a ton there about student-centered practices. And it really informed who I became as an educator. So that was a phenomenal experience. Somewhere along that way, I also did my undergrad at UGA. And I can't say I was proud of their anti-racism work. I'm just going to say that. Wasn't proud of it. So now then I did my grad school at Georgia State. And I learned so much. I did the Urban Teacher Leadership Program. I did the Educational Leadership Specialist degree, and they are so committed to equity work, to anti-racism work. I learned a ton, and I'm so proud to have done my grad school there.
The focus for all of our viewers tonight is all about, it's a movement that these young ladies are leaders in, started right here in Atlanta called Black Lives Matter at School. And through my work at the Educator's Room, we've been really doing a phenomenal series that will continue, I think, on this Friday with the next installment about educators getting involved in anti-racism. And I know that Black Lives Matter at School is something that really anyone in the United States can be a part of, and any educator can jump in the movement. And we're going to talk about how these young ladies did this in Atlanta, how they facilitated this massive rally, how they made local news and national news with what they've done. But in that process, I want you guys who are joining us to also think about what questions you have and just in general that you would ask these ladies, and please don't hold back. My first question I have is for you, Jen, before we gear up for this topic and allow our guests to kind of think through what their questions may be. And my question to you is, in this time frame, a lot of educators are really making some really hard choices. people are considering, am I going to go back to my position in the fall if we're forced to open because of mandates from the national level, state level, and in some places even local level? Do you recommend an experience abroad? Like you talked about your time in New Zealand. Do you recommend other educators consider that as something that they could do to learn and grow?
Wow, I cannot recommend it enough. I really cannot. If you have the opportunity to do that, to expand your horizons, to make these new relationships, to have these different experiences, like it will stretch you as a person. It will stretch you as an educator. You will have adventures you never could have even pictured. And I mean, I just cannot recommend it enough. And in the
what was
climate,
the best thing you experienced in New Zealand? The best thing about New Zealand was?
Okay, so my husband and I are kind of, dirtbag hippie climber types. So we had this little minivan that we bought secondhand, and we drove it all over the place. So over in New Zealand, they're on a balanced calendar. So you do like 10 weeks on, 2 weeks off when you're teaching. And that lends to really great travel opportunities. So we were able to, like, just on a shoestring budget, I would teach for 10 weeks and then we'd hit the road and we'd go explore and we would see mountains and beaches and cities and jungles, like all within driving distance. So gorgeous place, so much to offer. Again, just like cannot recommend it enough.
New Zealand has emerged as a very safe place to be right now. In the COVID-19 epidemic, their amazing female president was very instrumental in stopping the spread of coronavirus in her nation. Yes. And they are primarily kind of back to normal with some of the lowest cases being reported in the world. So shout out to New Zealand and awesome women in leadership.
That's right. It really goes to show what proactive, responsive leadership looks like. I'm so proud. She's one of my women heroes. Like, she's incredible.
And we want to also shout out to anyone on the line. If you're in a school or state that is who has decided to not return to face-to-face instruction, shout them out as well so we can also appreciate them and call them out. Brittany, let's talk about how the Black Lives Matter at School movement started in Atlanta.
Okay, so it started right here on Facebook. I'm a part of a teachers group, I believe Teachers of Georgia, Teachers of Atlanta. I posed the question like, hey, I am interested in collaborating with some educators in regards to how equity and justice, like how we have lack of, how we don't have justice in the school system. And I asked if anybody would be interested, and Jen was one of the first teachers to hit me up and say, hey, let's do it. And then from there, we built and collaborated and grew into this beautiful team and started this phenomenal movement. Black Lives Matter at School, March 2020, here in Atlanta, Georgia. So.
And Jen, how did you connect? What connected you to this movement? What motivated you and inspired you to join with Brittany to see this through?
Sure. So these days in my education professional journey, I am no longer serving in the classroom. And so one opportunity that affords me is being better able to support and having more capacity to support the teachers who are in the classroom, because the classroom is such an all-consuming place. Like, it really, your whole heart goes with the kids, right? And it sucks you in. And I totally get it. So I want to be a support for teachers who are still in the classroom. And so when I look back at my career and I look at the different teaching experiences I had, different leadership experiences I had, I've taught in high affluent schools, high poverty schools, in schools that serve predominantly white populations, in schools that serve predominantly students of color, in schools that served mostly neurotypical kids and then mostly neuroatypical kids. And the differences that I was seeing across those environments were striking. And I don't mean in a good way. I mean simply there was inequities glaring in the differences between the experiences that kids were having. And that's not to say there's not exceptions. There are some incredible schools that are doing really purposeful, culturally relevant work. But on the whole, what I'm seeing is that the experience that some kids are having is very different than the experience other kids are having. And it's not acceptable. So when I heard Brittany say, we need to do something about this, all of this stuff is rising up in our nation, all of this unrest. And I was like, yes, someone's doing something. Let me be part of that action. Let me support however I can. Let me use whatever privilege I can to lift this up and be a support and be in this movement.
Yeah. That, you know, one thing that we have experienced in our conversations around anti-racism, Jen, is a lot of people in a lot of places saying things like, I don't feel comfortable raising my voice as a white person to do any of this work. There are a lot, some of our educators have expressed, and I won't say a lot, but the ones who have been bold enough to seek out understanding have said things like, I'm afraid of the backlash I'll get from my very pro-Trump community. And one thing I want to be careful about is not to say, you know, my Republican community or my conservative community, because thankfully a number of Republicans and conservatives right now are coming out in opposition to some of the hateful rhetoric that may be a part of different movements in that party. Mm-hmm. So with that being stated, you know, what any advice that you have for them? Because when you people who are watching may not know, but again, when you say you've grown up in Douglasville, that you went to UGA, I know that you have been around people that may not have had anti-racist views, just from the simple fact of those two communities and those neighborhoods and what I know your growing up may have been. So any advice that you have for any white educator who is afraid right now to raise their voice?
Sure. So I consider this work having 3 layers to it. So when you're working towards anti-racism and you're on that journey, which is a forever journey, it's not a place that you arrive at. It's a place you constantly work towards. There's interpersonal work inside yourself and inside your heart you have to be doing. There's interrelational work, which needs to be in your close circles, in your family, and your friends. And then there's societal work. What can I do as an engaged citizen to make a difference? And I am by no means perfect at this. I do the internal work. I'm part of a book club right now with a group of white women who are doing the white supremacy 28-day challenge, digging into like what whiteness is and, you know, what we need to face as white people to be effective in this movement. So there's that layer. I do have difficulty sometimes in the interpersonal and the family relationships. It does result in conflict sometimes. And, you know, it takes having to put myself out there and have the courage to have the hard conversations in a way that's compassionate, in a way that, you know, you have to toe a line in a lot of ways. It is not easy. And again, like I'm learning as I go. And then that final layer, the society level, is I've been trying to do a lot of self-education about what does it just mean to be an engaged citizen? What are my duties and my rights as a person who is a citizen of this democracy? And when we say liberty and justice for all, we need to be able to mean it. So what kind of ways can I contact my elected officials to make sure that that's true? What kind of ways can I be informed as a voter to make sure that's true? So there are layers to it. And I think like when you start thinking of it in that way and making sure you're focusing on each piece, it helps you just keep that going.
We have 2 great questions on the line. We're definitely going to get Abla to your question about reverse discrimination. But we're going to start first and foremost with Michela's question, which is number 1, is there a Black Lives Matter at schools globally that people can connect with and get involved with? And then, you know, is there a relationship between anti-racist teaching and abolitionist teaching and how they might be able to relate?
Is that one for me or Brittany?
Either one. Either of you can take it, and I may add a little bit of icing on the cake.
Okay. I've been talking a minute. Go ahead, Brittany.
Okay, so globally, I do know that there have been a lot of teacher groups nationwide. Not too certain about globally, but I'm quite certain that they do exist worldwide, because this is a worldwide issue in a sense. But how does the topic teaching and abolitionist teaching relate? So I'm not too familiar with abolitionist teaching, so I wouldn't be able to share too much information. I don't know if Jen or Dr. Kirk, if you guys have any information about, do you know a little bit about abolitionist teaching in a sense? Okay, and if so, can you share? So.
So you can, there's a whole entire movement of Black Lives Matter at school, Michelle, that you can connect with. And they actually started, and of course, predates the George Floyd incident, the George Floyd murder that motivated and inspired so many people to get involved in this moment. And I think I've said on multiple platforms that the COVID-19 crisis that our country is being affected with is the worst experience for the nation that I have had to live through in my lifetime. But at the same time, there are some true rays of light that have broken through this moment. And one of them being the fact that the whole world had to stop and they had to watch police brutality that communities have suffered and engaged with for generations. And everyone had to watch it, and it motivated and inspired people to move. So even before the George Floyd murder happened, there was a Black Lives Matter at School movement that you can Google, you can go to their website, and you can get involved in. I also urge, though, a number of educators who are thinking, what can I do in my local community or in my local state? So organize yourselves and start your own movement. And you can call it whatever you want to. You can call it Black Lives Matter at School in Atlanta or your local community, as these ladies did, or you can have a different vision, because the more groups that we have of educators who are of like minds, rallying around the common goal of equity and anti-racism, the better our communities are going to be. So the next question for you guys, for me, will be, how do you recommend educators mobilize from step one all the way up to build to the platforms where you guys got to your eight demands? And we'll talk about those 8 demands, but I also now want to go to this question from Ismail. I think I said it right. If I didn't, Abla, please forgive me. But what about reverse discrimination? If you could do me a favor and just give you, Abla, tell me what you mean by reverse discrimination. I'm going to assume, I could be wrong, that you're saying when members of the Black community discriminate against members of other communities, maybe. Well, any thoughts from either of you about reverse discrimination, then I'll give my icing on the cake. I'm not gonna give any icing. I'm gonna give a cherry on top.
I don't know if you guys want to hear my thoughts about so-called reverse discrimination, but in my eyes, I feel like the oppressed cannot be the oppressed, the oppressor. I grew up with believing that, and in my eyes, when you are the one to go through life being oppressed with everything, with inequities in every part of the system, it's pretty hard to be discriminatory in a sense, unless you mean in response, if you're talking in regards to people not liking you because of whatever reason, your attitude or character and not knowing you. I'm not too sure, but I definitely want you to expand on what do you consider reverse discrimination, because it's definitely different from what I consider. So.
Sure. And I would add to that when I think about the word racism, let's think about the word racism. That I've always heard defined as discrimination or prejudice plus power. And we have to think in our society, who are the groups that hold power? And when a white person from the culture of power and privilege, because that's the world we live in, a world colored by white supremacy, has feelings and discriminatory thoughts about someone from a different group, that is a very different power dynamic than if someone who is a person of color has a prejudgment thought or a discriminatory thought about a white person, because that power differential is there. So power dynamics are a huge part of the conversation.
So I'm laughing because I know Jamel is going to be angry at what I'm about to say. She loves what you just said. She loves what you guys just said. She is going to now hate what I'm going to say. And Elizabeth, when I say anti-racism, it really is meant to be the opposite of racism. Like, it means that, and it applies equally across the board to everyone. It is a vision, and I'm reading a book, and I've read a book, and I really want you to read it with me, Elizabeth. I want everyone to read the book, Stamped from the Beginning. Not How to Be an Anti-Racist, because both are the same gentleman. How to Be an Anti-Racist is a really easy read, and I recommend that too. But I really want you to read Stamped from the Beginning, A Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Dr. Ibram Kendi. It's a very hard book to read. I didn't realize it would be so hard for so many people. I've made it a book club book for my for a group of people, and we're going to read it. We're going to do a digital talk about it. But a lot of people who have bought the book said, Zach, there's no way I'm going to have this book done by President Obama's birthday of August the 4th. So I'm going to have to push the deadline back to maybe August 27th. But so you still have time to read it with me, and it'll help you understand the concept of anti-racism and what anti-racism is. And I'm sorry that you feel, that is utter BS. But this is an actual sociological term, an actual sociological concept. And the book is actually now free on Spotify, so you can listen to it. I certainly think, Elizabeth, that you're going to benefit a lot from reading the book, and it'll help you. Personally, and this is what I was saying that Jamel may not be in agreement with, is that I believe that I agree with you, Jen, that racism is a term when people don't have power, they're not able to use it or have that control. But I do believe that people can be prejudiced of any race or any creed. And an example of that from, well, Elizabeth, thank you. I'm glad you read it. You weren't influenced by it. So we're going to just go ahead and move forward from that.
Well, just one last thought for Elizabeth. It sounds like Elizabeth is a white woman, and just speaking from one white woman to another, again, I just want to refer back to the layers of internal work, interpersonal work, and societal work, and that if you're not doing all three, it can be really hard to understand concepts like that. So just a lot more encouragement on digging in, facing those pieces, and coming to the understanding that it's not white versus black, white versus color. It's all of us versus racism. That's anti-racism. Let's dismantle that system together.
Mm-hmm. Good job, Jamel.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that. And if you guys can just give me a brief moment to indulge, and we'll move into the organization question. This week, I know on Facebook, I posted about the Nick Cannon interview with Professor Drift, right? And I got a lot of very nasty and negative commentary, and I had to make my profile private from public because I've already reached out. I have 5,000 followers. I can't add any more followers anyway. So when people unfollow me, and I think I lost like 26 followers yesterday, I can start adding new followers, which is good because there are people who actually probably want to, see some of my posts, because I post a lot. I actually am very offended by what Nick Cannon said. And we have to, there's work to do internally and externally. And Jen, what you just did for me was the external work that we need allies to do. When someone from the outside who is not a member of our community wants to leverage ideas and thoughts and concepts that are inherently racist or offensive, we may not be able to defend ourselves from the inside, but you as an outside member and an ally can defend us. But the same thing goes on the inside. When someone inside the Black community does something that is offensive or harmful to that community or others, we have to be able to raise our voices and say, you're wrong. It is not okay to get on a platform and espouse hate, period. And what Nick Cannon did, even though he tried to qualify his statements, he made anti-Semitic comments, and he made comments that were rooted in conspiracy theories and concepts that were rooted in hatred that were harmful to a whole entire subgroup of people in the United States of America. And it's not acceptable and it's not okay. There is a long-standing number of, there's a history between the Black community and the Jewish community that is phenomenal. In the civil rights movement, there were many members of the Jewish community who had just undergone the tragedy and the genocide of the Holocaust, who joined with Black people in the civil rights movement and pushed forward. They were financiers. They marched right alongside us. And then there was a movement afoot by racists to divide those two communities, to make people to divide because there was too much power in the unity, and it worked. We have seen, many people don't know that history. They've forgotten that. And they're quick to allow those seeds of dissension to still grow and still take root. And it's heartbreaking. We have to call out hate and racism any and every time it is seen and ensure that we take it to task. Unfortunately, I'm quick to say I'm glad Nick Cannon has been canceled. He will not be forgiven by Zackory because you are a grown man and you know better. And that's that. And a lot of people didn't watch the interview. Professor Griff is not only anti-Semitic, but he's homophobic and he's misogynistic. And you can't give people like that room on your platform. And when you do that, you are complicit in hate. Or so I believe. And I was just joking, Jamel. I was joking. This is like one of my best friends in life. So I was joking. Let's get back to the heartbeat and talk about what you would recommend to teachers to get started locally to mobilize around the Black Lives Matter at School movement.
Okay. Jen, did you want to take this one?
No, I mean, I'd love to hear you talk about just kind of what got you started down this path, and then I can add on to how we built momentum from there.
Okay, absolutely. So I've been an educator for 6 years, over 6 years now. So this right here has always been my heart. It's always been my baby. Injustice in school systems is nothing new for me. So when you mentioned that whole, okay, there are fires. Our community, our culture, we are lit. We are livid. We are angry. Everything is just happening. And that kind of, then I said, well, let's go to the root. Because these babies that we see in these streets that are, just with all of the, what's going on, well, they start off as kids. And it's kind of like, how can I help my babies first as kids? Because they experience this as kids. This is nothing new. So let's go to the root where, we're trying to get those weeds and we're trying to sow our seeds and we're trying to plant and we're trying to water them and flower them. And I'm thinking, if we could really just protect them right now, imagine the flowers that will bloom, and in a sense where it just be so much better. And not just even even just my community of Black kids, but in other communities as well, reaching out to those teachers who do teach kids in other communities as well, so that way they could teach their kid how to be anti-racist, so that when they are an adult, they're more sensitive and they're more conscious of their actions and their words and just their way of life and living and thinking, because it's necessary and it's needed, in response to not just our community, but all throughout this world. So this is why and reason why I'm like, okay, I'm tired. Enough is enough. We've seen what's going on and how the system is playing its part, and we need to dismantle it. So that's my 2 cents. And in regards to, you want to know how to start it up and get others.
How would you recommend, right? So how do you recommend? So let's say that I'm if I am I'm a white educator I'm in Vermont, and that's a bad example though. Vermont is very progressive. Well, it's progressive in some ways maybe not so much. I saw my good friend from I want to say Rhode Island, Vermont. So if let's say she wants to create a Black Lives Matter at school movement or Black Lives Matter for Educator movement, what would you recommend as the very first step? Should she try to organize a group on Facebook? Should she?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I definitely recommend, of course, Facebook worked for me. So of course it will work with others. We have Facebook groups in Georgia and Atlanta, but say if you're not on Facebook, say if you're on Twitter, Twitter is a platform as educators. It's big. It's a big deal. A lot of the school systems are requiring that we now have a Twitter account. So I feel like that's a good way of access to forming a group. And say if you're not a social media type person, we do also have kind of teacher networks where they come to visit your school and you can attend meetings. Like we have GAE, and they are a great resource in far as connecting and collaborating with other teachers who have same like-minded agendas. Propose the idea to a group who think like you, who feel the same way you do, and then just create a plan and go from there. And reach out to, sorry.
So step 1 for you was creating the Facebook group.
Yes.
You came together, you created the Facebook group. Then how did you find Brittany?
Yeah, so she and I are both members of a local teachers group, just Atlanta teachers on Facebook. It's a Facebook group. And so she just posted in our thread something about like, would anyone be interested? And so I replied, and so did 60 something other teachers. I mean, there was a lot of interest in this. We ended up actually forming a team of 10 people who were part of the organizing team. So that's how many people came together for the organizing part, not to mention those who were interested in supporting in different ways and attending, all of that. So just don't underestimate the power of social media as a tool for change, because since then, I've also come to realize there are groups all over the nation that are doing similar work. Like even the title, Educators for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter at School, there are people in other states who have groups established that are doing that work. Even just yesterday, I found out about a group that's just starting up in, I want to say Oakland maybe, that's something about abolitionist teaching that we mentioned earlier, Teachers for Abolition. And so you just got to look out for those opportunities on social media, and don't underestimate what a powerful tool we have available to us. Think about other historic movements that happened that didn't have that. Like, what an advantage we have to make a real difference, and let's not take it for granted.
And, you know, Elizabeth sent me down a rabbit hole earlier. Let's go back to abolitionist teaching, Jen, because I think both Brittany, can you give us a little bit more insight into this movement and what it represents and how it's taking education forward?
Sorry, you said me or Brittany?
Jen.
Okay.
I think both Brittany and I may need to know more about. I have not heard a lot about abolitionist teaching in regards to this work around anti-racism. So if you maybe know something about it, or Michelle, please also join in too. Like, tell us about it, because I know after this, I'm going to be feverishly researching and reading, because I want to know more about this concept to see how it dovetails into what we're doing in this movement that we have going in education.
Absolutely. So I am such a beginner with that particular term and learning more about that term. A great follow on Instagram has been one called Subversive Thread. If you want to follow at Subversive Thread, I've learned a ton on that one. Again, there's one that's called Abolitionist Teaching that I've learned a lot from that one. I liken the conversation to abolitionist to be similar to the vocab that I had to learn around the defund the police movement. There are different people with different levels of belief around defund the police, abolish the police, all of those different things. So I think us learning those vocabulary terms and how to use them is an important part of self-learning. And so I am on that journey with you. I cannot say I'm an authority and can define that, but I'm very interested in learning more. It all does fall under this umbrella of critical pedagogy, which I'm very, very interested and engaged in. And actually, speaking of critical pedagogy, a couple of resources that came to mind a minute ago, I'm noticing there have been a lot of comments that go back to power dynamics. And I can't say enough how much an understanding of power dynamics is to this conversation, and really having a full understanding of what we're dealing with here. Brittany made a comment earlier about the oppressed and the oppressor, and that reminds me about Freire, Paulo Freire. He always talked about the cycle of oppressed and oppressor, and how the true path to liberation is freeing ourselves from that pattern. Oftentimes you see the oppressed become the oppressor when they gain power, but what we really need to do is liberate ourselves from the system entirely so that we can stop repeating that pattern. So anything by Paulo Freire, by Bell Hooks, and by Lisa Delpit, please, please, please read them and dig deeply into power dynamics, because it's such a key element of this conversation.
So I think that takes us, and it's a great way to now segue. And we had so many great comments that's coming in. I love it, love it, love it. And, you know, again, abolishteachingnetwork.org for those who are watching, and, you know, the comments are going fast. And also there's an abolitionist teaching network on Facebook that you can join and get involved in. And then we're going to do some Googling of Lisa Delpit, who I've read some of her great work previously, as well as Bell Hooks, who I love. When you talk about your 8 demands, let's talk about these 8 demands that we have leveled out for schools. And because that's a big part of the movement. Tell us about your 8 demands and how those 8 demands came about. Brittany, tell me, you know, how did you guys come up with 8 demands for Metro Atlanta, and just that part 1? How did you come up with them?
So we first shared what we would like to see as far as what's wrong with education and system. So we each share kind of like our top tier things. Like, we don't like A, B, and C. So once everybody pretty much shared, Jen and I believe Claudine kind of created a list based off everyone's thoughts or whatever, and we kind of narrowed it down in a sense of what we all agreed, if I can remember to an extent. But we just started there. This is what we prioritize it in a sense, I want to say. What we feel like is something that action needs to kind of be taken into consideration, like action needs to happen like right now. So we prioritize that.
Yeah, and one of my favorite parts of the process that we went through as a group when we were trying to determine what our 8 demands are is we actually just started by imagining. by allowing ourselves to dream and imagine and envision, like, what would it look like at school if we truly meant it when we say Black Lives Matter at school? What would that look like? And so the ideas just started flying at that point, because all the educators in the group, we've seen these injustices firsthand, and it's heartbreaking. So we knew exactly what it would look like because we've seen what it doesn't look like. So we dreamed, we envisioned, and through the group, we realized there were several that we didn't necessarily see eye to eye on. And then some beautiful civil discourse had to happen. We had to have a dialogue of like, okay, well, why do you think it this way? Why do you think it that way? And just kind of wrestle through it together.
Yeah.
So, and I'm actually trying to go through my screenshots to pull up the 8 demands to kind of go over each one. I'm going to continue to browse through that. But one thing that I think was really to share is what came up that really was a lot of debate around. Which of the 8 demands caused contention points? And for those of you who are joining us in discussion, I want you to think about that question too. What will it look like in a school for Black lives to truly matter? What does that look like? And I want you in our chat while these ladies share to also kind of share some thoughts too, because we may need to go beyond 8 demands. So tell us about the ones that gave debate and contention.
Okay, so one of the ones that was kind of like a toss was the resource officers. And we've gotten a lot of feedback in regards to that as well. So it was like, remove them all. And so, well, one of the other teachers in the group was like, well, I'm from a school where we had a school shooting, and I don't know if I feel comfortable with the resource officers being removed. My experience was, well, I've never, I know in media, we do see a lot of times resource officers being aggressive, but how true in effect, like, I personally, would like to know what are the numbers in regards to how aggressive are resource officers in schools, and kind of in a sense like, well, some schools really do need resource officers because the dynamic and the culture of the school, in a sense, but maybe it could be more so the type of training that these resources have in their response to how they deal with kids that are aggressive, in a sense. But we're still kind of work out the kinks in that one and things like that. So
Jen?
From my perspective, I think, the piece I brought to the table with that is it comes down to funding to me and the way we're spending money. And I think that a budget reflects priorities. And when we have 4 schools in the metro Atlanta area that have police precincts within their school district and within their school board building, that to me is a problem of priority. If we're spending money on having our very own dedicated police precinct within a school system, what does that say about us? I mean, we've got to question those things. We don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but we have to question it because the people in power need to know that we're concerned. And then when I saw the budget come out, the budgets were recently released, and the state budget cut a ton of funding in the area of education, specifically in counselors. Counselors were the first to go, but you didn't see cuts to the education budget necessarily in the area of resource officers. So the fact that we are cutting budgets for schools tremendously, almost $1 billion came out of the state education budget, and a huge chunk of that came from counseling in the midst of one of the most traumatic times of our children's lives. So when it comes down to budgeting for me, it's priorities. And I don't know that we're prioritizing the way that is in the best interest of the children.
So I will be able to give a little bit of insight into, and I'm going to share in a moment, a great comment from Madison, I think, that really just kind of hit what some things that I think. But in Atlanta Public Schools, I served that school system as their director of curriculum instruction at a time when the previous superintendent brought in her own police force to have a police force in the district. And that was done because the city of Atlanta's police officers were being extremely hard on our kids. You had kids getting arrested for offenses that shouldn't have led to an arrest. And you had kids getting now records and rap sheets and mugshots that didn't warrant it. Just because you were disrespectful to a police officer in a school, you now have a mugshot. So by creating your own police force in that school system, you're able to monitor and combat an offense with an appropriate consequence, and not a disciplinary record or worse for kids, an arrest record. And so that's one reason as to why I know that district did that. But at the same time, you make a very valid point about the lack of counselors being there. And Madison states that again, school and community culture, meaning that cops shouldn't just be in schools, but they have a bigger role to play. And she's, at her school, alternative school, those cops are appropriate. In other schools, it may not be. But what if the role of a school resource officer really was the role of a school resource officer and not the role of a school police? And what if that school resource officer was able to actually be an advocate for social justice and go beyond that and truly be a part of the restorative justice process that builds up children? I think that's a part of the conversation we should be having in our school systems is let's transform the position of a school resource officer from being a mini cop to maintain law and order to being someone who actually adds to the actual landscape of your school in a positive way so that kids who display issues with conduct get support and really get to the root cause of why those things may exist. And we Keith adds in, no, you're wrong. Hey, Keith, yes, good buddy, Keith. Hand class from Althea, and then they need a teacher who can hear well or who has a listening ear and compassion and empathy. And I agree with you.
I think that one mistake we make in education and honestly in policing is expecting one person to do 45 jobs at once. And, I think we just need to be a little more thoughtful with how we allocate our budgets, like how much of it is going to social work, how much of it is going to counseling, how much of it is going to a resource officer, how much is going to teacher training, and who's expected to do what. So when we set people up for success by allocating budgets in more reasonable, more equitable ways, then I feel like every individual is set up for success. Because when it comes down to it, a police officer, that's a human being too. And if we're asking them to do a million different things, we're not setting them up for success either.
I agree 100%. So, and we're going to go here. This is, and we'll share Madison's comment. Here is, the very first one. You talked about ending zero tolerance discipline and implementing restorative justice. Kind of hit on. And with that one, is there ever a case where there should be zero tolerance? What about a school shooting?
Ooh, that is touchy. That is touchy because we can't, it's hard to say. Because we were in class, and I think we've all heard this conversation from our professors when they reach out and they say you have to be okay and comfortable with knowing that you won't reach them all. And I think that was the pill that was hard for me to swallow. And how do you respond to those you can't reach? I don't know if you guys had that conversation with professors, but I did. So I'm still debating that in my head. Let me process.
One thing that I experienced is that there isn't a kid that someone can't reach. There are kids that I could not reach. There are kids who did not respond to me. There were kids who, no matter how hard I tried to break through, they weren't going to let me in the wall. But there were other teachers that they did respond to, and that they really took. So that's the whole reason that you have a whole school community. And as Madison states, in her alternative school setting, and what you really find across America is that a number of very successful alternative schools or alternative school environments, they're the ones who do this best because they have found a way to reach all children because there is no other option but to do that. So I think the key is having a school community that really works for children so that the child has somewhere to go and some advocate for them there.
I think that pushed us to think about that question in a little bit different way too. Like, why are we talking about school shootings? There's so many pieces within that as well. Like, I would love to see our country have more sensible gun regulation. And I would love if, as a school, we had such strong wraparound services with ample counseling, ample social work, community engagement, that we didn't even have to ask that question, that zero tolerance is such like the 25th step down the line that we don't even have to go there. Like, that's what I want for schools.
And right. And again, I think that's a part of, that's absolutely right. Like that solves the problem. You also have as your second demand number 2 is actively hire more Black teachers. Why?
Oh, do you know the statistics on African American teachers in the United States of America?
I did not, but I do now.
So do not quote me, but I believe it's 10 to 13% of African American educators in the nation. Now, I didn't know this personally because I attended an elementary school with all Black teachers. However, my friend from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, she has not experienced not one Black teacher her whole elementary school year, not one. It took her maybe middle, maybe high until she saw someone that looked like her, and then she made me aware that was the norm across the board. So that is when I realized, wow, we may not really have a lot of African American teachers in this nation. And why is that? Sorry.
Yeah, there have been. I looked the research and the statistics up when a number of people were saying they had, a lot of my Black friends were telling me they had never had a Black teacher in their life. They have never, not one, had a Black teacher. And, that was surprising for me. But then I thought back to my first couple of years in the classroom and the school, I was one of 3 Black teachers and the only Black teacher teaching an academic area. The other 2 teachers were PE teachers. So I guess, it may be a little bit more widespread than what we are aware of. And the need may be there. What is the benefit of having a Black teacher, do you think?
Representation.
That's what I agree. And that goes across the board. And that also, but that doesn't just apply to having Black teachers. You need teachers who are members and openly proud members of the LGBTQIA+ in schools. You need teachers who come from diverse backgrounds and diverse places to add to the education base that our kids are getting and what they are exposed to, and so that they are able to interact in our diverse worlds because they have the background and they have the experience and they have things to draw from. But not only do we need diversity in our classrooms, we need diversity also on our police forces. And I'm a huge supporter and advocate of programs that take white cops and put them in Black neighborhoods and give them incentives to live and buy in those neighborhoods, because that helps everybody in that community see and learn from that cop, and helps that cop also learn and see from the members in their neighborhood. I value those types of programs.
Yeah.
Well,
I would love to share with you. I've got pulled up, because this is how nerdy I am, the statistics for what our diversity looks like across Georgia when we think about our teaching population, our student population, and our overall population. So when I think about that demand on our list, what I want to see is a teaching workforce that better reflects our student population. And like you're saying, like that's a whole wide range of diversities that we want to see, whether it's, like you mentioned, the LGBTQ community. Well, also men. I want to see more male teachers. Like, it's a very predominantly woman heavy field, which lends to its own set of issues that we face as a workforce being mostly women. We're treated as a less than workforce. So that's a whole other issue. So here are some statistics.
And not only that though, Jen, let me take it one step further, is that I do want to see more men in the classroom, and I want to see more women in the principal's office.
Yes.
That is a major problem for me, is to see so many men. You have 3 men in an elementary school, and one of those 3 men now becomes the principal. It makes me sick.
Exactly.
Oh, that is so common. That is so common.
Our statistics. So the teaching force in Georgia is 60% white, while students are 40% white, and the overall population of Georgia is 52% white. For teachers that are Black, we have 21%, while students are 37% Black, and the overall population is 31%, and then the rest is a mix. So you see that we just have a mismatch, and Georgia is actually not as bad as a lot of other states. Like, we have a better diversity of staffing here than other places do. What we face here in Atlanta, though, is segregation. We have Black teachers teaching Black students, white teachers teaching white students, and then you don't get what I like to call windows and mirrors. You don't get to see what's the same as you and what's different than you, and both have value.
That's right.
More white children seeing Black teachers in positions of leadership and authority. I think that would have a really big impact on, again, I go back to the power dynamics. I want white children growing up seeing that Black people are leaders and having exposure to that.
It makes it, and it just makes a difference. You're right. Windows and mirrors and representation. And here's a great, and I have to do a shout out. I wouldn't be me if I didn't shout out Althea says you need more diversity on school boards. And then Keith says that we need to have more people in diversity and leadership positions across the board. Francesca Lane Warren, who is the CEO and founder of the Educators Room, is running for school board in Fulton County. She is in a runoff on August the 11th. She received the majority of votes in the actual election, but she's in a runoff now on August 11th. If you know anyone in Fulton County in Georgia, ask them to go to the polls. Vote for Fran. And if you are any supporter, you can also donate to her campaign. I know that she is pushing in the final days to take a fundraising effort that was meant to make it up until the primary, but she had to in June 9th in Georgia. Well, first off, the primary in Georgia was March 13th. Then it was extended to June 9th. Now it's in a runoff on August the 11th. So, any support you can give her matters, and that's one great step in getting an educator with educational experience in a school board seat, because that's where the real power happens. And for those of you that are out there, I know that Fran and I did an interview that's cataloged and archived on the Educators Room. Check it out, because we want to see more educators run for public office, because and more public school educators, because you have the know-how and the knowledge to do what we need to have done to move things forward.
Yeah, get Betsy out of there.
Well, I do believe that Betsy may be very well on her way out of there come January the 21st. January the 21st. The next demand that you guys talk about is mandating Black history and ethnic studies in the K-12 curriculum from a social justice lens.
Okay. I'm tired of talking about Thomas Jefferson and Christopher Columbus and Sell the Great Blue. Like, it's dated information. And I'm going to be honest, like, we put on a show. So, yeah, I'm teaching that. But in true story, we're going to learn about this Ruby Ridge is right down the hallway. And we just put up a pretend Thomas Jefferson, who I absolutely agree with. Do not agree with teaching, and I'm the only one that make a stance. I feel like I'm the rebel, because I'm going to write down who I want my 6 and 7-year-old kids to learn about, and we're going to go off that curriculum, and they're going to know these people are influential, these people are powerful, these people make movements, these people are the one that you need to know.
Well, and I'm going to say, Brittany, I don't agree. Here's the point of contention. So let me say, I think that it's important for children to know about Thomas Jefferson, but not just to know about him from the traditional place that we taught him in the past, but to teach him in the reality of who he really was. I think it's important for us to use source documents and to use actual historical evidence to back up claims and just lay it out there as it was. Thomas Jefferson was the 3rd president of the United States. He wanted to be the 2nd president of the United States. He was a contributing member of this nation and the rules and the laws. A lot of his philosophical beliefs seep into our national fabric of what makes America America. But at the same time, he was a slave owner who got involved in a relationship with a slave that he raised from birth. Sally Hemings was born on his plantation. He knew her as a baby. He started a relationship with her at 13, 14 years old and fathered many children. I'm not saying I would share that with the babies that you teach. But at the same time, I would not fail to disclose the complexities of these historical characters in the time frame in which they existed, so that children understand that there are multiple perspectives and sides to every story and every person. There is no such thing as a founder of America who was an amazing hero, like, our heroes and legends and holidays that you teach in 1st grade. We teach the full scope of what really was, so that kids are able to, from there, become curious and historians and do their own research to come to their own conclusions.
So maybe we need to switch that, because in the book, in the textbook, they teach us how they want us to teach those kids, and they give us the lessons in a sense. So maybe we can do that. Maybe we can change the dynamics of how I am going to deliver my instruction about this, American pioneer or whatever, founding father, and go from there and keep it basic in a sense. I can accept and do that. But what they want me to teach and how they prepared that for me and they lay it out, I'm not 100% like, I don't know, no. Maybe we can have more input in that field. So I can compromise.
So, I agree. So both Dan and Jamel, like, yep, you honest examination, and yep. And what Jamel, this is my interpretation. She hates when I interpret too. But what I'm seeing from this is educators have to be knowledgeable and aware and know the history themselves. So many teachers are taking what is given to them in a textbook and regurgitating that to kids, and we know it's coming from a biased lens. We know that it's coming from, for lack of a better word, a whitewashed content and whitewashed pedagogy and instruction strategies that's there. We have to go beyond that, all of us who want to do better, and make sure we know the whole full story and that we have used resources at our disposal to know the truth. And you know what? When I tell you that, Madison, you are 100% right. This is something, I'm going to be honest with you guys, that I was concerned about with the Black. This was my wish. I wish that Black Lives Matter at school would have made a concerted effort to attack the history standards in the state of Georgia. Every state has their own history standards, but when I served as the director of curriculum and instruction, I was fighting very hard against state standards, but I was shackled because I could not really make too big of a deal about it because of that position. And it was my job to advocate, but I couldn't necessarily take it public. But I feel as though the biggest disservice being done to Georgia students lives in the standards and the resources being shared by our state Department of Education, because it is from a very a place of oppressor to oppressed. And so when you look at whole entire units around holidays, heroes, and legends, and that's what we're teaching kids in first grade, that in and of itself is a level of indoctrination that to me is criminal. And so when we hear things from our president and from our Secretary of Education talking about, social justice is indoctrination, it really bothers me because they don't understand how teaching Thomas Jefferson as an American hero solely is real indoctrination.
And the word you used earlier, Dr. Kirk, was complexity. And I think that is what's missing. It's the honest look at what really happened. It's not whitewashing it. I mean, that is what it is. It's coming from one perspective, this very Eurocentric, white-centric perspective. And I would love to see history taught from more of a global perspective, and that, here in our country, we describe people of color as a minority. That's such just an American view, because globally, people of color are, of course, much more numerous than people who are white. So just having more of a global lens in history, I think, too, and thinking back to the transatlantic slave trade and what happened there, and thinking of that from a global perspective, not just the limitations of the United States slave trade, but how that was very interconnected in history with a lot of different nations. It's complex.
And it was a great point brought up early by Suzanne, and she stated about, she really wishes that her son, could have had a gay teacher. And that's why, again, diversity representation matters. And teachers have to stand up, and they have to be bullied themselves. But in addition to that, we have to fight against policies in school systems that make it okay to fire teachers because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. We have to fight against all of these things. We have so much work to do in our society to truly get to a place of equity and equality that it's unreal. And but it starts with small steps, and it starts with everyday battles, day by day. Also, it was stated about somebody made a great point, and it goes right into your next call to action or demand, and that is around funding more school counselors. And I want to say it was Keith who said counselors have to do more than just push paper.
Yes.
It's 2020. Why do we have one counselor per 600 kids in elementary? One counselor in year 2020, 600 kids, one counselor. That is dated. It is tired. And this is a problem that kind of, when Jen talks about wraparound services, that one person cannot save them all. So then what happens to the ones that fall aside and fall short? This is an action that needs to be taken immediately. It brings me to tears to know that I know that counselor, she works and she puts forth 100 effort. But what does it look like if I had 5 of those?
Then there's no way one counselor will serve 600 kids adequately.
It comes down to funding. It comes down to reallocating the budget in ways that reflect human needs. Like, we have to take this much more humanizing perspective about education. It's not all about cramming academics down their throat. Like, let's serve these little human beings in their fullness.
Good. Well, that's good to know, Suzanne. You tell that teacher that we are proud of him or her, and that we're thankful that for their service and what they did. And again, we go to the next comment was, again, here's a fact from Ashley: 1 to every 250 kids is the national recommendation. Even that is really too high.
I got to give a shout out to her. That's my school counselor friend, so she knows a thing or two about what she's saying.
And so, just imagine the impact that more counselors could have had on schools that, again, when you had school shootings, you had all of a sudden an increase in surge in school resource officers. What if you would have had, instead of a response by hiring more school resource officers, a response by hiring more counselors?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, is we've got to go further upstream. We can't just keep cracking down at the very end when it's too late. We need to go further upstream and serve what is the human need, what's missing and what's hurting. That's what I always asked as a teacher, is whatever behavior I'm seeing, it's a reflection of a need or a pain. And we've got to get to that root issue.
Wow. And again, Mass Alternative School, and even with 1 to 50, that counselor is still is still overwhelmed. The next one comes up, guys, you bring up and you talk about, that goes right along with the school council role, is having an investment in social emotional learning, curriculum, and training for staff members. What do you think will be the benefit of that? Tell me, why did that make the list?
So I had an experience where I worked in a school that was created specifically for students who have autism, ADHD, behavior disabilities, things like that. And we had social skills and social emotional learning class every single day as a subject class. Like, we take that class just like we take math, just like we take English, just like we take whatever. It was a class. And when we elevated it to that level of importance, kids took it seriously too. Teachers took it seriously, kids took it seriously, because it's at least as important, if not more. I mean, those are the keys to success in life. So when you invest in social emotional learning, when you equip your teachers with great training around it, when you've got counselors funded who can help push in and provide that kind of service, you find that kids are more able to access the learning because their needs are being met, and because they're getting strategies for coping and for being students at school, existing at school. It's all those behind the scenes skills that kids need to be successful in life.
I was fortunate when I was in Atlanta Public Schools as director of curriculum to work with 2 really awesome directors of social and emotional learning. The district invested in SEL. They hired a director. They also had SEL coaches that became eventually SEL coordinators. So they really put a financial investment in it. And so one thing that we did was, we not only had the explicit SEL time and ensure that all teachers were trained, but we also worked really hard to embed SEL in the actual curriculum.
Yes.
So students were learning about responsible decision-making that was iterated throughout the school day in the content that they were engaged in. So they were reading texts that talked about responsible decision-making and going through that and discussing it. They were going through that in their science exploratory time. So that to me also kind of, makes a difference.
Totally. Literacy in particular is such a great avenue for that. That just gives you so many great jumping off points for these social skill lessons. We love to integrate children's literature in these lessons.
Michelle, I don't know. I did not see that, but now I am going to look up Dina.
I know, right?
There's always an inverse, because this is the thing. And I want to say, I don't know, Dina, I'm going to research this Dina. And I think I may even write a response to Dina for the educator's room, in the fact that, I see what she's saying. But when you see SEL done wrong someplace, you need to address that, because it's being done wrong there. But the movement as a whole has a whole lot of value. I'm a big fan of the Castle framework. And so if you're not familiar with it, check out the Castle framework. That's really kind of where it goes. And it doesn't give you a prescription of how to teach this. It just lays out these really great core competencies or tenets of what SEL is and what should be there. Like, again, responsible decision-making, learning how to manage your own emotions, self-management, and self-awareness. Things that kids really all need to know. Things that have to sometimes, though, for some kids especially, be explicitly taught, because those things may not be taught in places where we think that they're being taught. A lot of what's being said now leads us directly into your next demand. And for those who are watching, we only have 3 more demands to go through, and we're going to then talk about the outcomes of the demands thus far and what we need you to do to help this movement forward in the city of Atlanta and then grow it. So stay with us. But the next one talks about having stakeholders involved in the budgeting and allocation process. That number one, you want a redesign of the school funding formula where you have input from stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the QBE funding formula, that's what we have here in Georgia. The QBE funding formula has not been redesigned since 1985. So think about all of the different things that have changed since then.
And it was cut by Democratic Governor Roy Barnes, who cut it in Georgia and cost themselves re-election. And now we have, Brian Kemp.
Wow.
Holding that gun. Remember that commercial with him holding that gun?
Don't remind me. So we haven't revisited the funding formula since then. And when we say participatory budget, we had a lot of conversations as a team about just every single way that teachers get cut out of the decisions that directly affect them. And budget's a big one. We want a participatory budget because we want parents at the table. We want students at the table. We want teachers at the table. We want this to be not a closed doors conversation, but one that's open, that we're engaging with as citizens. Because when it comes down to it, public education affects every citizen. We have to accept that it's a public system. So we all have to have concern for it.
It looks like I'm going to agree, Michelle, with the article. So maybe I won't be writing a rebuttal. It looks like I'm in agreement. And again, I do agree with this though. Grit and rigor is for laxatives. Like I'm not a huge, I've never been a fan of grit, and I'm going to tell you why. Like I was in a school system where at one point my assistant superintendent was all about some grit, and it really goes back to the whole bootstrap mentality. But you can't pull yourselves up by any bootstraps if you don't have any boots.
Wow.
That's the problem with this whole grit concept. It's an excuse that if you work hard and you dig in your heels, you can make it. But you really can't make it when the system is set up against you and it's designed to ensure that you don't make it. All you do is give people who are holding you back and blocking your progress an excuse to hold you back and block your progress, and they can put the onus for your failure on you and saying you don't have grit. So that's I'm kind of anti.
Anything that we do at the surface level without getting at the underlying stuff, we're doing a disservice. If we're not thinking what led to this and thinking about those systemic issues and learning about trauma-informed practice and figuring out like what are the community needs, the things that child might be lacking that are leading to any kind of behavior stuff we're seeing. You're right. Social emotional learning can just be like this Band-Aid, let's glaze over it. But you've got to go for the deep stuff. You've got to go for what's going underneath.
That's right. And you got to fund it. You have to go over
you got to fund it.
Which is why this is a very powerful demand to make. And Dan, I want to echo it. You're right. When I tell you I am voting in November, November the 3rd is my birthday. So if you want to give me a great birthday gift, you go and you vote your heart. You vote in the best interest of kids, because that's what I'm going to do. But when that president is elected or re-elected, but is elected, I am going to be the number one accountability partner. I'm gonna hold Joe Biden hand in hand. I'm gonna walk him up any steps and hold his water for him, so it won't be like when President Trump was going down them steps. I'm gonna be right there for him and catch him if he falls and give him his water and everything else, because he will be held accountable. We cannot afford to live in a society any longer where our leaders are not held to accountability on day one.
Yes.
Give them latitude. We cannot let them use party as an excuse. We then have to hold Democrats to a high level of accountability in the same way that we hold, that we're trying to hold right now President Trump and Secretary DeVos to a high level of accountability. Madison, I felt like I know I was in the minority when I was hating grit, especially in the district that I was in, because I was very vocal about hating the concept, and people looked at me like I had grown 14 different eyeballs across my forehead. The next one that you guys talk about is well-rounded assessments, and instead of high-stakes testing. Do you guys want high-stakes testing to end?
Can I go back to funding for 1 second before we leave that?
Absolutely.
The last thing I wanted to say about funding is I hope that people are aware that the biggest source of school funding is property taxes. And that is 100% inequitable by definition. So yes, I understand that the state steps in to try to make up that gap. Yes, I understand that there's federal Title I funding. But until we eliminate property tax as the core basis of funding, we are accepting inequity.
Yep, that is powerful. Like that right there needs to be taken from this conversation and made into like one of those really cute quote things all over my Instagram. And so I'm not cute. You probably don't know that. Like, let me just come out very clearly. I'm not a cute guy. Like, I know how I look, like, but I'm talking about like making cute stuff. I'm not like that. Brittany, I know as an elementary teacher from first grade, especially, I bet you probably have beautiful handwriting. I remember, I was really competitive in school. And in fourth grade, I made all A's and a C in handwriting because back in those days, you had a grade. And I threw my report card away. I was so upset. But the point of it is, it never got better. Like this hand, so I can't do anything cute, and it translates over even until I can into design. But that should be a full-fledged quote and a push because
I'm all over it. I love to make cute things. I do like graphic design. I nerd out on that too. So
we're not gonna ever get quality funding for education in the areas that need it the most when you fund based on the tax digest, and that's a very profound statement and a push. And again, that next push is about these assessments. Should we end assessments and use that money in other ways?
Yeah. If we're going to keep it 100,
keep it a buck.
So, I am a primary educator. It grinds my gears to have my 20 plus 6-year-olds taking these they are 30 question long state created assessments. They cry, they holler, they scream, they're confused, they're frustrated. And as a teacher, I feel, helpless because all I go is, baby, it's okay. We just do your best, push through, because in all actuality, it's just an assessment used to track them as soon as they step foot in kindergarten that continues to track them and kind of, in a sense, projectile, put them on a trajectory of where they will be placed along their life, academic life and education. So when they step foot in kindergarten with those high stakes tests, they use that and is biased to create the classrooms that will be created. So, you test this way, we're going to put you this way. You test this way, we're going to put you this way. And that is a disservice. That is funneling my soul. It's upsetting me.
Michelle, which Hamilton lyric? Which song? Give me the song. I've been making Hamilton TikTok. I know you follow me on Facebook, so I've been making Hamilton TikToks directed at the president. But I still use the music. I love it. I think Dan, I'm going to go to Dan and then Keith. Dan says, again, a collective portfolio, K-12 could be a much better way and a much more effective way of measuring student progress and learning. Dan, I agree 100%. I
love portfolio.
That's right.
I love portfolio based. What I want to see is a well-rounded assessment system. Like, I want to really emphasize that language. And I also want to separate the words high stakes from testing. We need to pull those apart because it's what we do with test results that causes all the damage. When we've got kids in tears, when we've got teachers worried about their evaluations, when we've got so much pressure on it that we're causing cheating scandals, there's something wrong. That is too high of stakes. So we got to separate that out for one. And then we have to redefine or get back to the definition of assessment. Assessment is, let me see if the kids I'm teaching learned what they needed to learn. And there are so many ways to do that. There's conversation, products, and observations. Those are the 3 key ways to assess. And we need to be empowering and trusting teachers to do their craft, which is education. And assessment is such a key part of that. So I think it goes back to educator trust, and it goes to us expanding our definition of assessment, because there is portfolio-based, there is project-based, there is performance-based. There's so many ways to show learning, and we're not letting our kids be who they are when we put them in this teeny tiny one-way assessment system instead of giving them this array of options that might fit their needs better and show them better.
And it's, again, a balanced continuum of assessments is the buzzword for it, and it's needed across the board to really show learning. I will be honest, I think I've already revealed my lack of creativity by telling you that I can't make your cute quote. But as a child, you probably, with that being stated, I needed a standardized test, and it probably wasn't fair to anybody because I could take a standardized test and knock it out the water. I was my high school star student because I made the highest score on that, ACT, SAT, but it didn't push me either. If I would have had a teacher make me do a portfolio and make me do those type of projects that I hated to do them, it would have probably forced me to think more creatively instead of so linearly around and it would have made me a person, right? And I was cheated by being able to get away with, Zach is, by just simply doing a standardized test. And those poor kids who could do those type of creative assessments, their creativity was squelched. They were put in a box and they were limited, and the lifelong consequences of that are probably deafening.
Yes. Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, my background working predominantly in special education, like we saw amazing things when we let kids exercise their own voice, their own power. They were doing student-led conferences. They were creating these beautiful portfolios of work. They were having showcase nights, demonstrating their learning to their parents. There were tears. I mean, when you give kids the freedom to show you who they are and what they know, you will be blown away.
I agree 100%. And again, I just keep thinking about too, in this era, doing away with traditional standardized assessments that will free up a lot of money that could go into closing the equity gap that exists in our nation.
Yes.
So we have seen now more than ever before a number of families that don't have technology to do online and remote learning. We see a number of families that don't have the Wi-Fi access. They don't have connectivity. All of the money that we're spending on standardized assessment at the state level could be pushed out to give those resources to those communities in every single state. In Atlanta, we have plenty of nonprofits donating computers and ensuring connectivity. But I'm from rural Mississippi, and I know for a fact there is not one discussion being had in my hometown around kids that don't have laptops and kids that don't have internet connectivity.
It's unacceptable. I mean, we have this gigantic digital divide that was part of the conversation for a couple of minutes back in March. And then where did that go?
It just, it became the next topic.
Exactly. And one thing I was going to say, Dr. Kirk, about what you said a minute ago with testing, that goes to the true definition of rigor, not the one that has been misused against groups of kids.
You're 100% right. The real rigor is in creating. The real rigor is in collaborating. The real rigor is in communicating, and that leads to that critical thinking. I was cheated out all that good stuff because I could, figure out some stuff real quick. Process elimination. The last and final demand that we have for school systems is to fund wraparound services to go beyond the school into the community.
That's my
that's how I wanted to cue it up and talking about computers and lack of access and the real equity problem that exists in our communities and how wraparound services can help support that.
Okay, so I've had this question in this debate with my sister. It's a current debate. She goes, Brittany, kids at certain type of come from different demographics, like their families just don't care. Like they just don't care. That's why they're not involved. And I said, well, actually, this is systematic. So it's not that their parents really don't care. It's kind of like, well, what positions are they placed? Their mindset is like, I got to make money. I got to feed my baby. So it kind of limits them being able to be proactive and involved in education in a way that could really propel their own child. So what if we had a service for them? What if we had something to protect, to cultivate, to really just kind of like that good old fashioned, looking out for your community, neighborhood, back in the day type service for our families, in a sense where, someone can loosen the strings for them so they can get involved. They can be more proactive. And she goes, well, what about their thinking? The way they think right now is just not good. And in a sense, I'm like, we can change that. It's all systematic. It's, it's kind of conditioned. So let's kind of dismantle that type of thinking and figure out ways to dismantle so we can create a different narrative for our kids. That being wraparound services.
That's right.
Sorry.
Jen, I'm going to go to you next. Just wanted to add to Dan. You know what, Dan? You've given me a great idea. We need to start a whole campaign where we write letters to Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Apple and ask them to fund one region of the United States to ensure connectivity. I don't think it should be that hard to do. So that's what we can jump on that and make that a new priority, because it will help significantly bridge the opportunity gap that exists in our districts. Jen.
I think if we just going with that, the connectivity thing,
or wraparound services.
Wraparound services. So two pieces. So one, what you said, Brittany, I hear that argument a lot too. And to me, that goes a little bit with adult social emotional learning, because like we need to be cultivating compassion. We need to be cultivating empathy. We need to be cultivating perspective taking. Like if you haven't lived in poverty, if you haven't grown up having to overcome 1 million obstacles to even get to the school door, then do you know that that parent doesn't care? Like that gets under my skin. Clearly, I have personal experience. I grew up, the church sponsored our Christmas. I mean, we had to overcome a lot, and it's not easy. It's not easy watching your parents work a few jobs to even keep food on the table. Like you've got to understand that you don't know what someone else is going through, and passing judgment on them is the last thing that's going to be helpful. So there's that piece. Now, when it comes to wraparound services, I would love for us to re-envision schools more like community hubs, community centers. So it's like there's the learning component, that's public education. And then there's all these other public services that our nation has not invested in. Like we are not doing enough to address poverty. I mean, schools, think about what they're doing, the free lunch stuff, the laundry service stuff, the doctors coming in, the eye doctors coming in. Like those are all community-based services that are so needed, but have nothing to do with public education. We need to have separate buckets of money that are doing those different things and treating it more like a community hub. So I love what you said, Brittany, about like going back to where communities are communities, and having this thriving hub that has those different pieces just would be such a great way to reimagine how schools work. So there's that. And then going to the point about connectivity, I would love for us to also start thinking about, like, this is going to come across real unpopular, but I'm going to say it. How much of school funding should we be relying fully on the government? I'm going to get pushback for it. I know. But when you talk about Microsoft and Amazon and whatever else, like there's big money out there. And if we were to diversify our funding sources, wouldn't we have a more rich base of funding to work with? Just throwing out something controversial.
100%. But here's the challenge. Many of these companies are so concerned with getting money from the school systems that they can't think about how to put money in the school systems. And there have been massive pushes and movements in education that people have bought into. I won't target it or say there's a whole list of buzzwords that were simply created just so these companies can make money from schools.
Wow.
And they benefit from, Apple in education. They benefit from Microsoft in education, but they're not
Amazon.
That's right, but they're not contributing back at the rate they should. So you take taxpayers' dollars from school systems, you need to give some money back and truly partner with our schools to help make them better. That's absolutely
that. And I think too, like when you think about the wealthier, predominantly white schools, what do they often have? A foundation.
And partnerships.
And I think what can we do to help our schools who are in higher poverty areas to have access to that kind of funding? When you've got an active PTA that are writing grants for you, that are putting money into a foundation or an endowment that you can live off of that money, and then you've got the school next door that the people who are bringing their kids there have several jobs and don't have time to write grants and be in the PTA, like that's a huge inequity. So like, it's an interesting thing to start thinking about, like, how could we close some of those funding gaps that aren't necessarily the public education funding,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've laid out the 8 demands. And so hopefully, and there's an article that I wrote with these 2 amazing young ladies that's going to get published in Education in Atlanta. It's a website called Education in Atlanta, but I'm going to see if Fran can also share that with the Educators Room audience. So that you guys can see more about their journey and more about the details of how they created this movement in Atlanta, as well as their 8 demands. The next question becomes, what has been the result? We had the march on June 26th. We had hundreds of educators take to the streets. We all had masks. You guys if you didn't have a mask, you guys provided masks to all the protesters who came out, or the demonstrators who came out. We had speeches. We went to 4 different parts of the city. We went in front of the Juvenile Justice Center of Atlanta. Then we marched over to the Atlanta Public Schools Central Office. Then we marched over to the State Department of Education. So you get the whole, this is all on June 26th. You guys can Google, Black Lives at School March Atlanta, see it. It got lots of great press. What has been the outcome of the progress made between the 8 demands as you sent them out to school systems and local entities?
Well, Jen, we just had this conversation. Jen, she spoke really well on how we're about to get ready for action and the steps. So I want you to share that great idea with others.
Sure. So some of the actions that we asked of people at the march were, 1, send out this email that's pre-written for you that's going to go directly to this long list of elected officials, whether it's local school boards or state legislators. And then the second part was a petition on change.org, sign your name, and we're sending that. So we're going to have coming up a second push with the petition to get, our goal is to have 1,000 signatures before we send it. So coming up on the anniversary of the march, we're having a big social media campaign to get that out and get more signatures on it.
On July 26th?
Sorry?
On July 26th?
Yes. So we'll be putting a lot of stuff out on that. We have received a few responses from the emails from board members and people like that, but they've all been very canned responses, nothing very inspiring. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of action, which is a big disappointment. So if you are a board member watching this from any of the metro districts, we would love to hear from you, and we're disappointed that we haven't. So our next step is, as an organizing team, we're sending a second letter asking for a sit-down meeting with these boards and with the state legislators to remind them that we have not forgotten about these 8 demands and that we will be following up with them. So that's the last steps from the march. Moving beyond that, one of the phrases I always say is education has no shortage of problems that need solving. I hate to say it, that's the truth. So we are in the process of incorporating our organizing team into a nonprofit entity, a 501c4, so we can continue our lobbying and advocacy work and do some fundraising along the way. And we are calling ourselves Educators for Equity. That's going to be our umbrella term, because while Black Lives Matter is a super important issue, again, there are so many other equity issues that need to be brought to light. So some of the next 2 that are on our agenda are helping teachers fight for their rights when it comes to being forced into unsafe working environments. It's completely unacceptable. Teachers are being taken advantage of, and we are in the process of working with lawyers and with teachers who have gone on strike in other states to figure out what rights do we have in a right to work state, because it's tricky when you're not a union state, but there are things we can do, and we want to stand by teachers to make sure that their rights are elevated. The final thing is defunding. So the schools have been defunded, and we want to continue bringing to light that taking away almost $1 billion from education in one of the most critical points in history is a huge mistake. How do you expect us to do pandemic education with less money? How do you expect us to deal with racism coming to a complete head in our nation and knowing that education could make that difference, but not having any funding to make a change? So those are our 2 big issues coming up. We'll be doing social media pushes. We'd love for educators to join us and get involved in this. Email us, keep checking our website, get in touch. We are moving on more issues. We are not stopping here.
That is powerful. That's another quote. How do you expect us to address pandemic education and racism coming to a head over the summer when we go back to school with less funding? And all across America, there's less funding. I hadn't thought about it that way. I can think many people haven't thought about it that way, that we need more money than ever before to do what we have to do. And
I wrote today that in education, we have 4 crises coming to a head simultaneously right now. We have a racism crisis, a public health crisis, a defunding crisis, and an oppressed workforce crisis. Those 4 things coming together right now, I need everybody watching to understand, threatens our very democracy. It threatens the existence of public education. So we have to fight. We need more than just educators in this fight. If you're a citizen of this country, this impacts you too. Call your local board, email your local board, call your state elected officials. Like, we've got to be contacting them and holding them accountable to do something about these crises that are going to impact us drastically.
Do you have a place online where, or could we create a place online where educators could pull the letter that's already there and they could use that same letter as like a form letter to send out to their elected officials?
We do not yet, but I love that idea and I am writing it down. We'll make it happen. We will make it happen.
Yep, I think that would be something to like take like our article that we wrote for education in Atlanta and to share with the educators room, and then have a link in where they could pull down those resources. I know that you have your co-created ed. Did I say it right?
Co-created, yes.
Co-created organization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, I had been working on building a teacher training program designed to close equity gaps in the classroom. And the reason it's called Co-Created is because I believe I bring in a set of tools, but I completely consider the school I'm working with to be the expert on their environment, their students, their context. And so I'm a big believer in collaborative professional development and working together to co-create a plan that works for your school. So that was my plan. Then the pandemic happened. So I've been pivoting my business right now and creating an online marketplace that would more easily connect school leaders with high quality training providers in ways that are quick, simple, and effective. So that's the work in progress right now. So it's kind of equal parts. I've got the business side going on, and then I've got this activism and equity work side going on because that's my heart and my passion. So kind of two paths at once.
So I had no idea this whole time the banner was there. So I just checked my messages. I just popped up and saw that I had a message that said, turn the banner off. So I had no idea that you could see that banner. So it's there. It's there for the whole freaking 1.5 hours broadcast. You're going to see that sign that said banner can be created. With that being stated, I think that really does kind of wrap up all the questions that I had to explore in this look at what you're doing Black Lives Matter at school. We have some homework, ladies, that we have to get done to get back to our viewers. I think it's going to be a benefit. Do we have any more questions from you guys who are out there around this topic that you want to share? Anything that you ladies want to share with our audience before we say goodnight?
I am just so grateful to have been here. I appreciate you so much, Dr. Kirk, for hosting us. And I just want to shout out the rest of our organizing team. Like, I am grateful to be surrounded by the amazing women that helped put this together. I am honored.
Right, there's a man.
Yes, and like professional organizers. Civic Georgia is an amazing organization for folks to know about when it comes to community organizing. He knows what he's doing and was such a valuable resource. So how dare I forget Kevin? He was incredible.
You forgot Kevin.
So how can people find you guys on social media, like on Twitter and Instagram?
Okay, so we do have an Instagram that you guys can follow and a Facebook page. Our Instagram is Black Lives Matter at School. That is spelled all the way out. There is another Black Lives Matter already. They are based up north. We were trying to reach out with them to see if we kind of can collaborate in a sense, thinking that it would be kind of nice to have different chapters around the nation. But our Instagram definitely is Black Lives Matter at School. So check us out on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter. Yeah. And did I miss another thing?
Sorry?
Is that all of them?
That is all for the Black Lives Matter. And again, we are making some changes. So you can expect that the Educators for Equity, bigger, broader umbrella will be coming soon. So that's in the works. And then for Co-Created, it's at learning.co.created on Instagram. And my website is co-created.org. So please get in touch if you want to talk anything about equity issues, if you need any services for your school, any of that stuff, like happy to chat.
All right. Well, thank you guys. And you can always find me guys on Instagram, Dr. Kirk English on Instagram, Dr. Kirk English on Instagram. You can find me there, and I had a great time. So I will see you guys on the next one, and the next one is going to be about literacy and social emotional learning, and how the two things integrate together and how we can make easy work of this with Dr. Erica Battle. Thank you guys, and have an awesome rest of the week and a great weekend. Be safe, stay maxed up. We got this. We're in it together.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.